If I was looking at investing in any business, I'm looking at the leadership of the business. A lot of entrepreneurs give up on their dream because they were pulling, so they don't really know. So how did you break through the naysayers and just say, I'm going all in on my idea?
When I knew I couldn't work for anybody else, then I knew I better make it work. I wanted to change the world.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Building Billions with Brandon Dawson. I have a remarkable guest today. I'm going to let him introduce himself, and we're going to talk about the genius behind the entrepreneur that created one of the biggest brands on this planet. And I'm so excited to have him on the show today. Hap, introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are and what you built.
Well, thank you, Brandon. It's great to be here. I'm Hap Klopp, and I built a little company called The North Face. I started it when I left the MBA program at Stanford. A lengthy story, but it all boiled down to the fact I couldn't work for anybody else. I had too much hubris, and I had too many ideas that were different than the business world. So what I concluded if you can't work for anybody else, what you should do is start your own business and see if your ideas work. And so that's what I did. And for 20 years, I ended up running that. I sold that company. VF now owns it. It's a public company. We started from scratch. It's a $4 billion company now. And frankly, we didn't envision billions when we started. We were just going to have fun and make a better product than anybody else out there, and thought that would do. And now I write some books. I do consulting. I kind of divide up my time a third and a third. Consulting that I do, consulting, advising, investing. I do another third, which is kind of teaching, and then I do some things which is random to make life interesting.
So talk a little bit about when you had the first, because we talk about with the entrepreneurs we work with, we talk about the idea. Right? Somewhere there had to be a spark where someone said, this is worth pursuing. How did you have, and what was the idea to start the North Face?
Great question. Once I got beyond the fact I couldn't work for anybody else, then I said, well, I've got to start a business. And I always thought I was going to be a leader. I'd run a family company when I was an undergraduate. I went to Stanford undergraduate, and at that time, my father died, and we had a wood products company, and we made windows and frames, sash and door. We were quite small relative to the Pellas and the Anderson and Weyerhaeuser and whatever. And so I did an analysis the first year while I was going to school. So I was running the company, going to school, drinking beer, and I figured out we weren't going to survive because the only way we were going to do it is we're going to have to raise tens of millions of dollars. I was going to have to move the factory, and I was probably going to have to fire all the management, people I'd known my whole life. And that was pretty daunting. So I decided I'd sell the company. And I got into the MBA program. I had 4 jobs. I was running the company. I was selling the company. I was getting my MBA and drinking beer.
Drinking beer is what important.
Yeah, that was the only thing I was good at. but having done that, I had a taste of running a company. I developed some knowledge from the MBA and running it, and so I knew I wanted to run a company. Then what should I run? Well, I didn't know much about much. I'd spent my whole life in the outdoors because I was raised in Spokane, Washington, and that's what you do in your spare time. So I always believed you should stay in your lane. What you know is something that you can be better at than somebody else, not academically that I'm going to read about it. And so what I had found and what I believed was that going deep into the wilderness was a really transformational experience. And I wanted to change the world. And I believed you could. I believed a business could change the world. And I believed that a business was obligated to change it. And the way I wanted to change the world was to have people go into the wilderness, deep into the wilderness, and experience that. Because all of the urban problems that existed, and we had as many then, the 60s.
Yeah, just different, right?
But they're just different, just like we have right now. But what I knew from personal experience, and Thoreau said it best, he said, in wilderness is preservation of the earth. But what I knew is when you went deep into the wilderness, you forgot about those things. And you came back being a better steward of the earth. You wanted to protect the environment. You wanted to change it. You were positive in an attitude, not this negative urban attitude, the sort of thing that I see right now.
Yep.
And so the idea was to develop a company that would capitalize on people going deep into the wilderness. So now we come to, okay, so how, why, what's going to be different? What I knew from personal experiences, an inhibitor for people going deep into the wilderness was the weight of the gear that they had. So most people would go to a campsite about 100 feet off the road
Yep.
because of sleeping bags and tents and things.
Carrying their big pots and pans around.
Yeah, and they wouldn't go deep in the wilderness, so they wouldn't really have that experience. So the North Star was to come up with the lightest weight gear possible to facilitate people going deep into the wilderness. So we took materials from the Vietnam War and repurposed them for camping gear. We took aircraft aluminum and made tent poles and pack frames. We took parachute cloth and made sleeping bags, tents, some funky clothing. And what we did is lighten the load by about 50% and sent people into the wilderness. Now, overriding that was my belief that you needed to make the best product, the product that would last forever. And towards that end, we put a lifetime warranty on it as sort of a statement of what we were doing, and our belief in it was good for the environment because it'd never end up there, but it also was a statement where we were. But from my experience of the wilderness, I knew if you had a product that failed, you could die. And so people would buy the best, even if they didn't have a lot of money. And when I approached financial sources and whatever, they said, well, you're crazy. That nobody, the people you're talking to are tree huggers and granola lovers, and they don't have enough money.
Isn't that amazing? My experience is, just to interject for the people watching and listening to the show, my experience is a lot of those educated people that don't have any real life experience will always tell you all the reasons something can't work. But then as soon as you offer for them to go make something work, they opt not to.
Yeah.
Like there's more opinions than there are like people that actually want to go figure out how to do stuff. How did you weather through as you were listening to those people sharing your idea? Because this happens to a lot of entrepreneurs. They give up on their dream because they had enough people, because they were polling, what do you think? And do you think I should do it? And do you think it'll work? And they're asking a bunch of people that never done anything, or they're asking people who think that they know because they're smart or educated, but they've never gone and built anything, so they don't really know. So how did you break through the naysayers and just say, I'm going all in on my idea?
Well, it was a brilliant observation, Brandon. The first thing is, go back to what I was telling you, I'd sort of cut off my my fallback. When I knew I couldn't work for anybody else, then I knew I better make it work. and no business is what you think in the business plan. You have to do a pivot. When you observe something and do that. So you have to be flexible enough to be able to do it. But the first one was, I knew there was no going back. I had to do it. I mean, there's a old story, I believe it was when Napoleon sent his troops to England or whatever, he said, burn the ships, and now you're not going to come back.
That's right.
But, so the first one was believe I wouldn't do it. The second thing was to try to figure out, how you could do something differently than anybody else, because the naysayers are all telling you how the existing thing, they've read the book and they can tell you why that doesn't work. But if you go outside the book, if you go outside the parameters and you do something a little bit different than what anybody does, that's how you really stand out. And you may not be right, I may not be right on the first one, but if I keep pivoting and looking, I'll find a niche that other people don't have. But it's frustrating, as you may know, if you're trying to raise financing, you'll hear those same naysayers, and they would come up with it, and they tell you all the things predictable, as I said earlier. You can't have a lifetime warranty on your product, I was told.
You'll go out of business.
Yeah, you're ridiculous, you're crazy.
Yep.
Only cost us 1.5% of sales, and there was no advertising campaign that I ever could have done with that 1.5% that have the same impact.
That's
and
right.
It served that. So, so the idea is, one's perseverance, maybe a little bit hubris of believing it. The third one is making an all-in commitment. You talked about all-in, but you make that commitment before, and then you say, okay, I'm not going to lose. Now, you can't be totally foolish. I mean, there's some ideas, there's some times when things just don't work, and you need to fold up your tent and leave. And if you do, that's not the end of the world. We learn that in Silicon Valley all the time. Steve Jobs got kicked out of his first job at Apple. Mark Andreessen at Netscape, he got kicked out. So it isn't the end of the world if that happens, but don't just give up or whatever. But you've got to be 120% in, because you're going to hit tough times. There's always going to be black swan events. People look at COVID like it's unusual. I couldn't have predicted COVID, but I can predict there's going to be downs. I've seen them. I've seen the downs when you have, the mortgage meltdown crisis, 2008 or 2000.
The tech bubble in 2001.
Right, and those are going to happen. And if you're Kleenex, and fold, you're probably going to lose. So some of it is believing you're going to win. The second one is maybe looking over the horizon a little bit to see that these crises are different. I've got a friend who, I don't want to be lengthy about it, but he started a business that was in laundry and serving hotels and people that need it every single day. Business was going extremely good. This was in Cleveland until he was hit with a fire, burned everything down. He owned the building, and now he's got to fight with the insurance companies. And you have to deliver laundry every day, so you're down. What happens day two? Mm-hmm. And the easy thing would be just to give up and go work for somebody. He had 1 or 2 days, talked with his wife, said, we're not going to give up. We can win. And he was able to come back the way he did. First of all, he used his contacts. He contacted some people that had excess capacity in a town 60 miles away.
Yeah, there you go.
Could I
figure the problem out?
And then, and we talked about it, and he said, what I'm going to do? I didn't have the most efficient plant for handling things. I can get new equipment. And the new equipment would be laid out better than that. And then he went to his clients that he had, and he told them, first of all, he weeded out some of the clients that he kind of wanted to weed out anyway. And the others, he went in and made them the buddy. You can help me come back. We're going to do it. And he actually even talked with them, well, we may need to change the terms that have been doing because you've been paying me in 30 days, but it really helped me out. And you'd be building our business if we went to 15. So he turned a problem into an opportunity. But if you take the mentality that it's the end of the world, probably will be the end of the world.
There's probably a few laundromats that he could still do the sheets at.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. That mindset, to your point, is really super important. And as you know, as an entrepreneur operator, that rarely does everything go exactly according to plan. It isn't that it didn't go to plan, it's what you did to pivot. And to make something else work versus, I'm so frustrated or upset that this thing didn't work. When you think, first of all, how did you come up with the name The North Face? Like, what was that moment? Because I know as a founder that's had 4 companies, I can tell you exactly what I was doing in the moment when I was like, aha, that should be the name. So I'm certain that the moment it came to you.
Well, absolutely. And thanks, Brandon. I told you earlier this thesis, we wanted people to go deep into the wilderness or whatever. The way all of these markets, these consumer good markets work is kind of a pyramid shape. And at the top are the influencers and then secondary and whatever. And everybody in that pyramid knows where they are and they look to the people above them. That's why influencers work. And I'm talking about real influencers, not the Kardashians or whatever, but people who are in the know. Well, the people who were the influencers for the outdoors and the wilderness were really the climbers and the people doing exotic things. And at that time, there was deep mountaineering where people go to Nepal, but there was rock climbing and mountain climbing. And a number of people were climbing in Europe on the Eiger Mountain. And there were some books written about it. There was the Eiger Sanction and whatever. Well, the North Face is the North Face of the Eiger Mountain. So we chose a name that for the influencers really meant something, but at the same time was easily memorized by anybody else. But it immediately got us, in the eyes of anybody looking at it, one-in-one with the influencers for the market.
And so how did that happen? You guys were sitting around a campfire and someone's like, what do you think we ought to call this thing? Like, what was the moment?
Well, I told you we had beer and whatever.
So it was beer.
No, you talk about things, and maybe the first idea isn't good. You always talk about laddering in business when you try and come up with one idea yourself, and that one idea, you just burrow in on it and you can't break out of it. And you talk to somebody else and say, well, if you just take it over here, and you go, oh, no, it won't work. But if you took it back here and you start laddering, and we were talking about the fact that we didn't just want another name and we didn't want another logo. I told the guy is no damn trees. I don't want trees because we're going to be bigger than trees. We're talking about building a brand, and the brand's going to stand for the outdoors. It's not going to stand for trees. But at the same time, we started talking about, well, we need something that is exciting and electric as I said,
Dangerous.
A few people have been killed on that, so it has that edge that really is out there. So and so we were going back and forth, and you could come up with predictable names or local geography, but that had what seemed exotic at the time because it was Europe for those people that knew. It was definitely within the...
And what somebody's like, the North Face.
Yep.
Was it that kind of...
Yeah, we were going back and forth. Well, somebody goes, they were saying, well, we could do Yosemite or, we could do something around that. And people go, Yosemite, what does that really mean? It's nice, but, it doesn't there. Well, we do something climbing, well, how about Mount Everest? Mount Everest, there's probably already somebody that's doing that, but that also, that's more aspirational, not being involved. And I can't remember which one of us started saying, yeah.
And then a couple more beers later, somebody's like, what about the North Face?
Like people getting killed over there.
And then all of a sudden everyone's like, oh my God, this sounds amazing.
But it's really good when you do that. And frankly, if you bounce ideas off of other people, I've found it helps you clarify your own thinking. And even if you come up and you had the idea and everything, it's oftentimes kind of fuzzy.
Yeah.
And then you bounce it off somebody else and they say, you got to be crazy, and what do you mean? And then you go back and you go, yeah, I probably was a little crazy, but I know I can do it. They just didn't understand, but they didn't understand because I didn't articulate it very well, and I have to, refine my story.
Yeah, but I mean, what's so good about the brand is it has everything. It has intrigue, it has danger, it has beauty, it has accomplishment, it has all that in the brand. And so you start this, and when you started this, were you thinking to yourself, this is so good, I know it's going to be at least, a couple $100 million company? Or were you like, I just want to sell enough old World War II tents that I can pay my bills and get to the next level?
It started out with the second one. I mean, first of all, go back to the fact I couldn't be employed anywhere else. I needed a business that would generate enough to have a good lifestyle that allow us to do what we're going to do.
Yep.
And so, frankly, what I told myself at the time, and you'll laugh at this, but remember this a long time ago, but I said, listen, if I could have a $10 million business that made $1 million a year, I probably would be okay. And if I could do things I'm really proud of, I don't know how large it can be, but that would be okay. So, that was kind of my fallback. And I was saying, if I can I didn't want to make the biggest business. I wanted to make the best business, and I wanted to make a business that would endure forever. I believed in a brand, and because a brand's an annuity for future business and bringing it in, but if I could do it around things that really stood out, it was great. And I always believed when I was building a brand, that a brand is not a logo, is not a tagline, although you need those so people can see what you're talking about. A brand is your DNA. It is what you stand for.
That's an expression.
Yeah, it's qualitative aspects of what you are. And so I distill it down to a few key words, and those words have to be ones that are applicable across the entire company. The three words we did at North Face, pretty simply, were quality, disruption, and triple bottom line, meaning an equal commitment to people, the planet, and profits, and doing it.
That's awesome.
And then every 2 years, we come back and talk about it because we have new people coming in, and they all had an interpretation what the North Face was. And
well, at some point, you just get so big, people just think it stands for this massive outdoor brand.
Right.
And they simplify
or it could be like Dave. If you stepped into the company now and you were just a consumer, you say, well, it's an apparel brand, and what we need is another color. And we're saying, no, you need to adhere to these principles and whatever. So, so that's what we're doing. But going back to your initial question, it was, we joke about it, and there was an article, about, we called it the Scotch principle. How did you do that? And it was sort of there, but it said, we were talking over Scotch. We couldn't afford Scotch at the time. We drank beer.
It was beer.
But we're talking about, what do you want to do? Well, the only thing I know anything about is that. And we were talking, and and after a couple beers, we said, well, we should really, we should own the Bay Area because that's where we are. And then a few more, we said, well, why not own the U.S. and they're thinking, well, a few more. Well, we like international travel. Why don't we do that? And why are we going to limit
Maybe
ourselves?
we could go to the mountain and somebody will take us up there for free.
Yeah,
take some pictures.
Yeah, and we'll think it's great. So, and of course, as we evolved it and saw the opportunity greater than that, our expectations were there. And having a Stanford MBA and a lot of my classmates are doing really big things, obviously, you start thinking, could you do that? And we're able to do it. But you have to develop a lot of different processes and things. I never hired anybody at the outset because of their business skills. I only hired them for passion. passion for two things. One is for the wilderness, and the other one was for basically changing the world. And if they could do, I knew I couldn't educate them, I couldn't train them on passion.
Yep.
But I had the background from my MBA, from running the family company. I had the business background, and I knew I could bring people in, and we'd do that at our long-range planning, to educate them. But I needed the people who really cared about what they were doing. And I thought building a team was the key to doing that. Now, 11 of the people that were with me early on ended up running other companies or starting other companies in the outdoor business. So I think they were right. They probably would have gotten there on their own. In fact, I'm sure they would have, but it might have taken them 10 more years. But I believed you could build a team, build it around a great brand, that then you could really take that and do something great with it.
That's amazing. And so at what point after you started the business, were you sitting there one day and you were like, I did it. I did it bigger than I thought. There's has to be that moment for you where a bulb went off and you were just like, I actually exceeded what I had thought about, somewhere in that cycle.
You must have been sitting in my office when it happened, because you sense it. Obviously,
Yeah.
you've been there.
I know it. That's why you say, this to be true. You can't fake what you've done. I've done something on a limited based on what you've done, but when you have done it, you cannot fake.
Yeah. Well, there was an epiphany. And it was a strange one. We weren't large enough to do sophisticated marketing, where you're doing statistical sampling and things. I knew about that, but actually what I'd found is you don't need to do statistical sampling. You see 100 customers and they tell you something, 80-20 rule and all those other things. So anyway, what we had was a warranty card, because we had a lifetime warranty on it, so people sent in their warranty cards. So we decided we'd use that to get in touch with the customers. And we sent out one to about 100 customers. And we said, what do we make and why do you like it and what do you like to see us make? And I got this one back that was the epiphany. And it said, I don't know everything you guys make, but I know you make good shit. And
you need a catalog.
I knew at that point that we had this brand we're talking about. We had, you didn't want to abuse it, but we had the license to expand and move into other categories.
Yep.
We had the belief of the consumer, which you don't want to just be selling. You want people to be coming to you. That's what a brand's all about. And we were up to that point in my mind. We were selling. We were always going out and finding that next customer. I realized at that point that now customers were going to find us because of what we stood for, what we did. As I said, you don't want to abuse it, but that allowed us to get in some area. We weren't in skiing at the outset, but we moved into skiing because there was a niche about functionality that we did that fit that. Got into some trail running. There was lots of fractures of the outdoor market that we were doing. But the epiphany was just when I got that, I said, yep, we've actually accomplished not the goals, because our goals were every year I was looking 2 years down the road. So always with a little dissatisfaction, because I'd already experienced
You and I are two brothers, because I don't care how much we grow. I'm always a little pissed we didn't get bigger.
Yeah, and I knew we could, and sadly for the entrepreneurs coming in, I think that's the way entrepreneurism is, because when you're satisfied, you probably should have sold your company and left, or because it's time to move on. Because if you're there's somebody out there hungrier, faster, harder, who wants more. And
statistically, at certain sizes in your business, it's a handful of people on your team that are seeing that you're no longer pushing to get to the next level, and so for them to achieve the things they want to achieve, they're going to have to leave you to go do it somewhere else, and you end up losing your good people that you kind of pushed away just because you weren't inviting them into helping you go to the next level.
Agreed. You always should lose a few people because you're doing so well and you aren't growing fast enough to encompass everybody, and the pyramid sort of eliminates some of the good people you want along there. But when they start leaving in large quantities because, as you say, there isn't the opportunity they dreamed of when they came in, then you're saying something about the company. Now, it isn't the end of the world, but you probably should be selling your company at that point.
Or acknowledging what's happening,
Right.
and reformulating.
Right,
Yeah.
or you can size it and try and run it as a lifestyle company and recognize that you maybe narrow it down. I've got one friend who wanted to have the biggest apparel business in the world, and he built it. He was a great operator and had a great bottom line, but he was burning through people, making all these demands on him. And what he realized was, I don't really want to manage a lot of people, but I want what we're doing. I'm going to stay at this level, just doing most of the activities, my wife and myself and some others. And he runs a great business, but it's never going to be the North Face. It's never going to be that, but that's okay. But that's what he wanted. But he had to right size his thinking, because if you think you're going to be there, you hire, you invest, you bring people in, and then it's not justified if you suddenly there. And one of the things in his case was he did not like managing people.
Yeah.
He wanted to run a business, but he didn't want to manage people. And
it's such an interesting when people say that, because in order to have a successful business, the number one skill set that you actually have to evolve to, if you're not going to be one of the top innovators, right? Like Steve Jobs, his people skills maybe weren't ranked up there as the best people person, right? From the people that I know that were around him.
I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
What do you think the essential skill is in any business as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I would say, unless you are such an innovator that your innovation, it doesn't matter what kind of person you are, it's going to be your leadership and people skills. Mm-hmm. Because I've looked at every business model that there is out there. We did 10 years of research on thousands of businesses. I never found a business where it was just the owner by themselves. Yeah. There's always some component of a lot of people if you're going to get big.
And there's a technical, I totally agree, and there's a technical skill in there that people dismiss as not being particularly there. And I think you got to be a great salesman.
Yeah.
I think you're always selling to everybody. If you're putting a team together, you're a salesman. I mean, people, when they talk about sales, they say they're selling to the consumer.
Well, so to your point, I believe when a founder stops selling, it's because now they're under pressure. Now they're afraid. Now they're thinking of getting out. They stop selling because they've lost that belief about what's possible. And that is the first sign that a business is in trouble. And it's why people leave, because when the founder is no longer excited enough to be selling the proposition, selling the enthusiasm, selling the opportunity, when they stop talking about that, there's nobody else in the business that's going to talk about it.
Yep.
And then that's the first inclination when we go in and look at businesses. You just simply need to listen to, if a business owner comes into us, we've had 7 billion of businesses come through in the last 5 years here. When they come through and you're like, how's it going? And they're like, oh my God, I can't get good people. The market's shifting. I'm so frustrated. You already know they're in decline.
Yeah.
Like it does nothing, but when they come in and they're like, man, I've never seen a better business opportunity. Right. They're on the uptick. Well, the problem that most people don't recognize is the responsibility of the founder, the owner, the leader. And if a business is 75 million or more, the CEO's job is to do this. Like your friend could hire a CEO, but then the CEO needs to be good at this, and your operating person might be good at the technical aspect of operations, but a CEO has to be the best salesperson in the company because they have to be selling value.
Yep.
And if they're not selling value, they're not a CEO. And so to your point, and my partner wrote an awesome book on this, it's called Sell or Be Sold. And the whole thesis of the book is all day long, every day, somebody's selling you or you're selling them in every freaking conversation. Your employees could be selling you on why it's hard to hit targets. Yeah. The banks could be selling you on why it's hard to give you a loan. Your vendors could be selling you on why they need to increase the prices of your products or services. Your customers selling you on why they don't want to pay your price. Somebody's always selling you. So if you're not intentionally always selling, you're being sold. And that is what you're saying right now.
Yeah. And I found it across the board. It's remarkable. But as I said, it's an undervalued thing, almost dismissed sometimes.
Yep.
People go, well, salesman.
Oh, I'm not a salesperson.
It's like Willie Loman is a salesman or whatever. It comes in their mind. And the reality is, I think you always are. And there was a quote somewhere, I think Maya Angelou wrote it, but it's, and facts have shown that people do not remember what you say. they remember about a third of it. No matter how good a presenter you are, like you're incredibly skilled, but even as that, they only remember at best about a third, and maybe less if you aren't a great orator. But what they do remember is your passion, and they remember how committed you are to it. So when you leave that meeting room and they don't remember that, they're making an assessment. And their assessment is she or he going to be there? When it hits the fan, when the Black Swan event is there, are they going to have my back? Are they going to do it? And if you have sold them, probably by your own commitment and your passion for it, then you've got a team. And if they are questioning it when they lead, it doesn't matter how good your words were or what the business plan or how it laid out there, you're at risk.
100%. And I think that what I'm hearing you say, and what I believe we're 1,000% aligned in, is, in fact, I'll make this statement this way. If I was looking at investing in any business, I'm looking at the leadership of the business. That's going to be the first thing I'm looking at. If I was having a conversation with leadership in a business, and anybody on that leadership team said to me, well, it's not our job to sell, I would never invest in that business. Because if that's the belief at the top, that'll be the fundamental ignorance or arrogance through the whole system. And to me, if I don't find somebody, and this is what you're saying, that transfer of energy, of enthusiasm, excitement, commitment, the ability to articulate the value proposition and your unique value contribution to the marketplace. And so those things should make you so excited, should elevate how you communicate and project the message. And if you're like, no, that's not my job, man. My job is to, then I already know everybody under you isn't going to do it either. Yeah. You cannot hire.
They're going to be less than you.
That's sure. Right, less than you.
Totally agree. I do believe in terms of sales, the best salesmen are the people who believe what they're doing, not somebody who's incredibly skilled at convincing
and highly compensated. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. What you find is if they really believe, they'll make it happen. If they don't really believe, they're skimming it, and as long as things are good and everything's going, they'll probably do okay. But when it doesn't work and they've got to convince somebody, or you talk about the banker to get you more money or investors that you need going on, if you don't believe in what you're doing, they sense it in a moment.
And then they bail.
Yeah.
And you're like, I can't believe they bailed. No, they bailed a long time ago.
Yeah.
You just made it easy for them to succeed.
Right. Yeah.
So when you think about it, so 20 years you started the business and then grew it and stuff. And at some point, when did you say to yourself, it's time to let somebody else kind of take over the day-to-day?
Well, there were a couple of things, but we really had the wrong business model. And by that, and it's too lengthy for this podcast, but if we did it, I think it's pretty entertaining. In the apparel footwear business, you can only grow 20% a year on internally generated funds. Anything beyond that, you have to do additional financing. And you could trade back and forth as we were doing. So we get equity one year, and next year maybe it's debt going back and forth. But we were growing 100% a year. And we had a team that loved growing. Everybody was there. I loved growing there, whatever. But my job converted from being this visionary, from being a person who was loving the outdoors and spending it, a person who loved in building brand, somebody who loved building team members into something really great, into being sort of a poorly paid investment banker, which was not appealing to me.
Yep.
And I went through a round of financing, raised $10 million, but at that round, some of the people who've been in say, I want to get out, you're battling with them, what terms and who's, if you want to get out now, it makes it hard for me to bring capital in all these sort of stories. And so, but I did it. And my ego was driving me to do it. But one of my board members, who happened to be one of the heads of Boeing, a brilliant financial guy, but Clyde Skeen, but he came to me and he said, Hap, you've always said when it wasn't fun anymore, you were going to get out. And it doesn't look like you're really having the fun that you were having before. Your ego's there, the brand's good, everybody does it, but it doesn't look like you're having fun. And he was a good friend of mine. And
over a beer?
Yeah, probably.
Or had he gone to Scotch by then?
He drank martinis.
Yeah.
But when I did it, I realized I didn't want to do all that fighting again. I didn't want to be an investment banker. Somebody else would be better at doing that, better at selling that than I. And I would rather go back and either be an entrepreneur again or get involved with some early stage companies where some of my skills transferred and I didn't do it. So, people have often asked me, was it upsetting to sell the company? In my case, no, because I was in a job that was becoming less and less of the reason why I was there.
Yep. And this is why I say, so I was just downstairs explaining to everybody down there that business owners, most of them are founders, right? Unless they bought somebody's business. So most businesses in the small business space, they're founders. And then what they don't realize is that at 15 to 25 million, they need to become entrepreneurs. The telling sign of moving from a founder to an entrepreneur is when someone finally says, you know what we need around here to succeed? We need a strategy. Because entrepreneurs would never start a business if they didn't have a strategy, because they'd have targets and they'd know where they're going to and everything else. And this is all based on the research I did interviewing all these successful business owners, is that like, when did you realize you were an entrepreneur? They'd say, well, when we realized we needed a really good strategy, because then we wouldn't do anything if we didn't have a target for value. Like something switches from, I just want it to work, to why are we doing this? What's the expected outcome? Okay, that statistically happens somewhere between 15 and 25 million. But at 75 million, most of the founders are like, we either sold the business or we brought in a professional CEO, because they didn't want to become a CEO. And a CEO does the things you're talking about. It deals with the capital structure. It deals with entry and exits of shareholders if you have them. It deals with the banks. They deal with value creation. They deal with long-term, short-term incentive plans for employees, and they deal with the contracts. And, it's like a CEO's job is to be responsible for the overall value creation of an enterprise, right? Yep. And that is an entirely different job than the founder. So how big was the business when you finally were like, okay, I don't want to be the CEO and chairman of this company and have to deal with all that stuff?
Well, globally it was about 150 million.
Yep.
And as I said, globally, because we're probably half of that in the U.S., a little bit more. And so some of it was managing. We'd set up a manufacturing and marketing operation in Scotland for Europe, and we had a license arrangement in Japan and Asia, so we developed that. But it was, I don't know if it was the right time to do it, but it certainly fit into what we're doing. And the fact that it's a $4 billion company, I could not have made it into a $4 billion company. Not that I don't have the intellectual bandwidth to do it, but I don't have the emotional appetite to do it.
That's right. This is important because I just was downstairs talking to the group of business owners about, on the left side of the spectrum is intellectual ignorance and arrogance. And you can see that. You either don't know, but you're too arrogant to say, I don't know and I need help. What I see with the successful business owner, especially the ones we surveyed, is intellectual awareness and curiosity. So they're like, oh shit, I know I don't know. I know I need good people. I know I need help. And I'm curious about who I should get it from, forces them into asking good questions versus just listening to bad advice, right? And so the entrepreneurs that I see that are highly successful are very curious, and they're paying attention to what's happening around them. And they recognize, hey, if I graph or if I chart or if I look at stats, I have better intellectual awareness what's going on. So who do I need? And I say at 15 million plus, if you really want to be successful, you have to learn to become an owl. And what do owls say? Who? Who did the numbers? Who's doing them next? Who double checked them? Who verified them? Who asked the customer? Who followed up with the customer? Who trained the guy? Who trained the gal? Who trained the trainers that are training them? Who's checking to make sure they trained them right? Like you become an owl because that's really your job versus doing the work yourself, because you can't be the owl if you're doing the work. And so I've just had the pleasure of meeting so many remarkable entrepreneurs. And it's funny, I was doing a presentation at one of our conferences, and our next guest that was coming up speaking at it was Tommy Hilfiger. And so he was in the back with my partner, and then he came out. We had 4,000 people there. So he was sitting there, and my partner asked him a question. He's like, with all the success you've had, in your mind, what could you have done differently to be more successful faster? And Tommy Hilfiger points at me and he goes, Brandon was up here and put that chart up there and that yellow brick road. And I thought to myself, now, doggone it, if somebody would have shown me the yellow brick road versus trial and error through everything we ever had to do, we could have done it faster. You're a Stanford educated. I'm a high school educated. I get asked all the time in the university systems, why don't they teach the particulars, the granulars of how to do it? And I'm like, I have no idea. Maybe they do. Maybe people just aren't ready to receive it until they're actually experiencing it. What would you say would be the difference between what they teach you in universities, in MBA programs and things like that, versus what you had to go practically experience on your own?
Well, it's a pretty profound question. First of all, I do a master class with another person that I do some teaching with, and the umbrella title is What You Don't Learn with a Traditional $200,000 MBA Program.
Love it. So you're the perfect person to ask.
And the reality is some things are done for measurement at universities, things that you have to do that fit into a short time frame. Some of the things in businesses don't fit into 15 weeks that you're trying to do it. Some other things do not have concrete answers that you're doing that you have to come up with. School is about things that fit into 15 and where you have concrete, discrete answers with what you're doing. And they're also about getting the right answer. And there are many answers. You don't distill it down to one.
Yep.
So education is good at giving you the tools to execute, but not necessarily inspiring you to be an entrepreneur to be able to do it. And in fact, I've told people, when I speak at business schools and whatever, and I've Stanford and Holt University where I teach, University of California I teach and whatever, but I've said, okay, now you went to grade school and you were the best, and your parents told you, you need to go to good middle school because we really want, and so don't screw up. And so they did really well in middle school, and they went to a good high school. They didn't want to go to a bad high school. They scored really well. And as they were doing, the parents said, you've got to go to a better university. So don't fail or whatever. And so they get into a good university, and somebody tells them, no, you kind of need an MBA or whatever. And so don't screw up there. And I said, no, you go through all of that, and you never wanted to fail, and never wanted to make a mistake, and now you're going to be an entrepreneur. You're screwed. You're screwed because it doesn't work that way, and you're going to be making mistakes 3 weeks from now. And I said, it's a whole psychological thing. And so some of it is about always being right. And some of it is about doing things which are predictable, and other ones are entrepreneurship at its heart, as I see it, is about setting a direction, pivoting as needed when you're there, having perseverance to be able to ride through the downtimes, of which there's always going to be some, and having the dream and the audacity to be able to convey that. I mean, I don't see any program in any business school on what we talked about earlier on that type of selling. I mean, there's some, not many, that teach you how to sell. What are the rumors of it? And we talk about pipelines and all the things that you get from Oracle or whatever. Yep. But that isn't, the importance of selling what it's doing and assessing what your message is, and is the message true to you? It may be a great message, but do you believe it? If you don't believe it, nobody talks about it in there.
I've never been. I think that sound bite that you just rattled off in the last minute was one of the best sound bites I've ever heard, where you very succinctly talked about the dynamic of being an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And so we talked about the importance of selling. We both agree that the moment you stop selling, you're in trouble.
Yep.
And here's what I know. I know that anybody who's listening to this show, Building Billions with my buddy Hap here, I know this. If you're not laying in bed saying to yourself in your own mind, I got this thing. I'm going to beat this thing. I'm going to win at this thing. We're going to dominate this thing. The moment you stop doing that and you start asking yourself the question, can I really do it? Is it really the opportunity? Do I really have what it takes? I can't find the right people. And you're now concentrating, you've already given up at the game.
Yep.
Because what I show in the science is that in the leadership spectrum, it starts with me leadership, and that means I have to have the resilience every day to just convince myself, which is self-selling, that we're going to go do it. Because if you give up on that energy, everyone behind you is giving up, and now your weight that you're dragging got that much heavier. But then you have to be a phenomenal vision caster, because it moves from me with leadership, if you want to get big, to we. You got to sell everybody else and get them selling, because in order to get big, it has to move to us, which is the cultural thing you talked about. It's when everyone shows up wearing the brand, they love what they do. They want to go hit that mountain. They want to go camp with the gear that they sell, because by golly, that's what we do. That's what we got into it for. We love this. That's selling. It's all selling. And when all of a sudden the message lines are no longer those things, and it's about the difficulty and complexity, and it's about bad people, and it's about hard people, and it's about missing targets, and it's about financial results, it's about people mad at you, the business is on a deterioration run.
As you said that, it reminded me of one of the things that every 2 years we'd have a long-range planning process, because we wanted to level set everybody on what we were doing. And the people have been a long time would say, just give me the numbers, we're going to double or whatever. But we'd spend a disproportionate amount of time on what the company stood for and what they were. And because the new people, as I said, have some interpretation. We all have to be there. At the end of that meeting, I would always say the same thing, which was not novel to the people who've been around before, but it was startling to the people who just came on board. I said, I hope we're so clear that some of you leave the company right now. And I said, not because you aren't great. We hired you because you're great. But if you can't agree with the ideas we have, and you have ideas, and there are a lot of ways to run a business, but we're only going to be able to run one of them. So we've set what we're doing. If you can't be on board with that, we'd rather help you find another job where you can enjoy yourself and thrive, rather than have you fight us. Because we aren't going to change, at least for the 2 years till the next long-range planning, and more likely, because companies don't 180% pivot, that's where we're going to be for the long term. And some people left the company, a couple left and came back, and people were happy where they went, because we were going to do it our way. Now,
well, you'd rather be Hap wrong than be everyone else wrong, wondering why you didn't trust yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you don't trust yourself, who else is going to trust you? This is the burden, the resilience and the burden, the entrepreneur that moves to this is, founders don't feel that way. Yep. Founders are like, hey, if it works, it's great. It's only when you decide to be an entrepreneur where you're like, I'm all in on this thing, and I'm going to drag everyone's ass on the hill until you migrate to CEO.
Well, you said something earlier in the podcast which just relates to it, and that is, you're always going to hear from people why it can't be done. And entrepreneurs have to be able to, I don't know if thick skin is the right word, but they have to be able to live with that. Listen to it with one ear, because there may be some
substance to
it. But nobody believes an entrepreneur is going to thrive. And the people who are really bright, and I've got a few of them, a couple I can think are dear friends of mine, they would never be an entrepreneur because they're so good at dissecting how a company won't work. They've often said, I want to be just like you. I want to start, a company like that. And then they look at it and they say, well, when you look at all these things, it isn't going to work because of this. At a certain point, you've got to say, it may not, but I'm going to make it work, and that's what I'm going to do. And that's kind of different between the, sort of the big business mindset where you're filling roles and the entrepreneurial mindset where you're making these things happen, or at least that's my experience.
Oh, you are 1,000% correct. I love this podcast. You built one of the biggest known brands on the planet. So something to be very proud of. Your idea that the brand will outlast the people, it is true, because a lot of brands just go away over time. Your brand is as strong today as it was probably in the first few years of you creating it. And that's because of the reason you created it, the substance, the commitment behind it. So congratulations on that.
Well, thank you.
You're going to be speaking at our 9-figure boardroom this weekend. And I can't wait for us to be in front of the live audience. We may augment some of this podcast with that as well. And I just want to tell you, from one entrepreneur to another, thank you for trailblazing the way, giving encouragement to people like me to go get it, fight for it, and for teaching other people, because that is a big thing that's important to you, is teaching other people how to do it. A lot of my friends that have been very successful have kind of drifted away playing golf and going on their boats, but you're committed to teaching others, which I think is a very valuable resource for people. And how can they find you to get more information?
Well, I'm on the usual ones. I've got a LinkedIn website. I'm on Instagram, but that's more communication than anything else. I teach in whatever under a title, a brand title, the Three Amigos.
Nice.
It allows me flexibility. Also work with people that have different background, European, South American, electrical engineer, M&A, and whatever. So we can do it. Also gives me a little flexibility in what I'm doing. So through the Three Amigos, also through Hap Klopp. And if you look at LinkedIn, you're there. I've written 2 books. One is called Conquering the North Face. It's about success.
Awesome.
Another one is called Almost, which is about one of the failures I was involved in, a Silicon Valley company that shoulda, coulda, woulda, and didn't. And it's written in a story form, but you can distill down. There's 5 clear reasons why the company didn't make it. And I've always advocate, learn on OPM. Other people's money. And read books like yours, read others, because frankly, you're still going to figure out ways to screw it up, but there's no reason to replicate the errors I made or the errors that you found.
Mitigating the mistakes is the fastest way to success.
Yeah.
So, okay, 2 books. We'll put the links in here. So we're going to put the links on where to find you. Conquering the North Face and Almost. Right. We'll put the links in there. My team ordered me both those books. I want the Almost book. I'm working on my second book right now. It should be done by the end of the year. And it's kind of the operating system that we've created. But I'm storylining it, and it'd be curious to see how you storylined Almost. I had an Almost in the dental space. I sunk $8 million and then shut it down. And so you learn a lot from those mistakes.
Oh, yes.
And it's probably more valuable than the stuff you learn that you do well, because you won't repeat the things that hurt.
And as I said earlier, one of the things you learn in Silicon Valley, fail forward, fail fast. And failing is not the end of the world. And I've seen so many companies, you may have seen it in entrepreneurship, they've failed, but they won't admit it to themselves. How about just saying, hold it, either I don't have the right model, I don't have the right
I didn't get enough financing, it's somebody else's fault.
And you learn from it, you gain, you grow, you come back, you're more resilient. And the greatest thing that happens with failure, I tell people, is you learn to no longer fear failure.
Yeah, because you didn't die.
Now you can set really extraordinary goals. You talk about 10X and whatever, but one reason people don't set 10X goals is because they're afraid they're going to fail.
1,000%.
And when you eliminate that fear, you may fail along the way, but fail at the first one, fail at the second one. That third one, you're going to absolutely do it. And Steve Jobs got kicked out of Apple. He's not a nice guy, didn't know how to play well with others. He wasn't always brilliant, he was. When he went to Pixar and when he came back, he'd learned enough about how he played well with others that all of his brilliant ideas could be translated into where they were. But I don't think he would have been there had he not gone through that failure exercise.
100%. I agree with you. What a great conversation. You and I are going to have a follow-up podcast at some point, and we're going to get into some of your other stories that we didn't have time to talk about. But thank you for joining me on the show. Thank you, everybody, for joining me with another show of Building Billions. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Or if you're watching me on YouTube or you're listening on my podcast, I want you to like it, share it, and please leave comments. This helps us figure out what content, what information you'd like to hear from myself with the guests that I'm interviewing. So thank you. This is another episode of Building Billions with Brandon.